The distress signal reached Harmony Prime at exactly 4 in the morning. Station time. And Ambassador Jake Morrison was pulled from his sleep by the urgent chiming of his communication device. Something that never happened unless the situation was truly dire. He stumbled to his desk, still half asleep, and accepted the incoming transmission from the far edge of explored space, where an archaeological team had been excavating ruins on a dead world called Kethvarth. Face that appeared on his screen belonged to Thelkor, a Vaxian researcher whose reputation for careful, methodical work was known throughout the scientific community. But right now, the alien's usually calm features were twisted with absolute terror. "It has awakened," Thelkor gasped, his breathing rapid and shallow. "We did not know. We could not have known what was sealed beneath the temple complex." Jake leaned forward, suddenly wide awake, because he recognized the tone of genuine horror in the alien's voice. And in his 3 years as humanity's representative to the Galactic Council, he had learned that when a species as ancient and experienced as the Vaxians showed fear, everyone else should pay attention. "What is awakened?" Jake asked, keeping his voice steady and calm despite the growing knot of concern in his stomach. Thelkor's eyes darted to something off-screen, and his whole body trembled before he looked back at the camera with an expression that Jake would never forget. A look of complete and utter despair, the devourer of innocence. The alien whispered, and even through the translation device, Jake could hear the weight those words carried. It was a legend, a story told to frighten young ones into behaving. But the texts we found in the lower chambers were real. And when we removed the final seal, the transmission flickered, and Jake heard screaming in the background, high-pitched and full of agony that made his skin crawl. "Thelkor, what is this thing?" Jake demanded, his mind already racing through protocols and emergency procedures. The Vaxian researcher looked directly at him, and what Jake saw in those alien eyes chilled him to his core. "It feeds on children," Thelkor said simply. "On the young of any species, on innocence and potential and futures not yet lived. And it has been imprisoned here for 10,000 years. Sealed away by a civilization that destroyed itself to contain it." Another scream cut through the transmission. Closer this time, and Thelkor's face went pale. "There is a human child here," he said urgently. "Part of your scientist family, Dr. Lisa Chun, brought her daughter on the expedition. The girl is 6 years old, and she is separated from us, trapped somewhere in the lower levels." Jake's blood ran cold, and every instinct in his body screamed at him to act, to move, to do something immediately. "Her name is Sophie," Thelkor continued, his voice breaking. "The creature is hunting her. We can feel its presence moving through the complex, searching for her specifically because children are what it craves most." The transmission cut out suddenly, replaced by static, and Jake spent the next 5 minutes trying to re-establish contact without success. He immediately called for an emergency session of the Galactic Council, using override codes that were meant only for the most critical situations, and within an hour, representatives from 47 different species gathered in the main chamber, many of them clearly annoyed at being woken up until Jake explained the situation. The deepened mood in the room changed instantly when he mentioned the name Devourer of Innocence, and a heavy silence fell over the assembled alien sixth. A Valorian diplomat whose species had existed for over 1,000,000 years stood slowly from his seat, his multiple arms trembling slightly. "That name should not exist in modern times," Zixthil said quietly. "It is from the Age of Darkness, from before the current council was formed, and if what you say is true, then we are all in terrible danger." Other council members began speaking at once, their voices rising in panic and confusion, and Jake had to activate the silence function to restore order. "What exactly are we dealing with?" he asked, directing his question to Zixthil. who seemed to know more than the others. The ancient Valorian closed all 6 of his eyes for a moment before responding, as if gathering himself to speak of something truly horrible. It is a predator from outside our understanding of reality, Zixthil explained, his voice heavy with the weight of long-forgotten history. A being that exists partially in our dimension and partially in others. Drawn to the psychic signature of youth, of those whose minds are not yet fully formed. He paused, looking around the chamber at the frightened faces of his fellow council members. 17 worlds died before it was finally contained, he continued. Entire civilizations sacrificed their young to lure it into a trap. And even then, they could only imprison it, not destroy it. And the species that succeeded in that task went extinct from the effort. Jake felt his hands clench into fists as he listened. Because the picture being painted was one of absolute hopelessness. We must evacuate the system immediately, another council member suggested. A serpentine creature from the Karathi species. Seal off that entire sector and forbid any approach. There is a child down there, Jake interrupted. His voice sharp and clear. A human child, 6 years old. And you want to just abandon her? Several council members looked uncomfortable. But Zixthil spoke what many were thinking. One child, even a human child, cannot be worth the risk of allowing this creature to escape and threaten billions of others, the Valorian said sadly. It is a terrible calculation, but it is the reality we face. Jake stood up from his seat, his movements deliberate and controlled despite the rage building inside him. Humanity will mount a rescue operation, he declared. With or without council support, we will go to Kethver and we will bring that little girl home. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the chamber, and several species made gestures that clearly indicated they thought humans had lost their minds. You do not understand what you are proposing, Zixthil said, his tone almost pitying. Your species is young, brave perhaps, but young and inexperienced with threats of this magnitude. And this creature has destroyed civilizations far older and more powerful than humanity. Jake met the ancient alien's gaze without flinching, because in that moment he understood something fundamental about his species, something that made humans different from every other race in the galaxy. Maybe we are young, he admitted. Maybe we do not fully understand what we are facing, but there is something you need to understand about humans. Something that every species should know before they judge our decisions. He paused, letting his words hang in the air, making sure every representative was listening. We do not abandon our children, Jake said firmly. Not ever, not for any reason, and not just our own children either. Because the moment that little girl became trapped down there, she became every human's responsibility. The council chamber erupted into arguments and debates, with some species calling humans foolish and reckless, while others quietly admired their determination. But Jake was already leaving, already contacting Captain Ryan Fletcher of the human vessel Defiant. The rescue mission would happen whether the council approved or not, because humanity had a rule that superseded all political considerations and diplomatic niceties. No child gets left behind, no matter what monsters wait in the dark. Captain Ryan Fletcher received Jake's message while the Defiant was conducting routine patrol along the edge of human-controlled space, and he did not hesitate for even a second before changing course toward Kethvar's. Crew consisted of 23 men and women, all volunteers who had signed up knowing that human ships often took the missions other species considered too dangerous or too foolish. And when Ryan explained the situation over the ship's communication system, not a single person objected to the rescue attempt. Amy Rodriguez, the ship's combat medic, was the first to respond, her voice clear and determined over the intercom. A 6-year-old trapped with some kind of monster? She said, "Sir, push the engines as hard as they can go. Because every second counts." The engineer, Chris Palmer, immediately began overriding safety protocols on the jump drive, pushing their faster-than-light engines beyond recommended limits in a way that would make council inspectors horrified, but which every human ship captain understood as simply necessary. When lives were at stake, Dr. Ben Carter, their xenobiologist, started researching everything he could find about the devourer of innocence, pulling up ancient texts and fragmentary records from civilizations long dead. And what he discovered made his hand shake as he read, "Captain," Ben called out over the intercom, his voice tight with worry. "This thing is not just dangerous. It is something completely outside our normal understanding of threats." Ryan was already strapping into his command chair as the ship began its jump sequence, the engines building up that characteristic whine that proceeded faster than light travel. "Give me the details, Doc," Ryan ordered. "I need to know what we are walking into." Ben's voice came through speakers throughout the ship so the entire crew could hear. "The creature exists in multiple dimensions at once," he explained. "It hunts by sensing psychic signatures, specifically the signatures of young beings whose minds have not fully developed. And it feeds on what the ancient texts call potential energy, the futures that children represent. Someone cursed quietly on the bridge." But Ben continued his briefing. "Every historical account describes the same hunting pattern," he said. "The creature manifests near its prey, but does not immediately attack. Instead, it projects fear and confusion, breaking down the psychological defenses of its victims before feeding on their life force." Amy interrupted with a practical question that everyone was thinking. "Can we hurt it?" she asked bluntly. "Can our weapons even affect something that exists in multiple dimensions?" The silence that followed was answer enough, and Ryan felt his jaw tighten with frustration, because going into a fight without knowing if you can even damage the enemy was a situation that no soldier ever wanted. "We will figure it out," he said firmly. "We always do. And right now, our priority is getting to that little girl before this thing finds her." The Defiant dropped out of faster-than-light travel just outside Kethvar's atmosphere 6 hours later, having covered a distance that should have taken 3 days. And what they found made everyone's blood run cold. The archaeological site was in ruins, with several buildings completely collapsed and scorch marks covering the ground where something had burned with intense heat. But there were no bodies visible from orbit, which somehow made the scene even more disturbing. Ryan assembled his away team quickly. Amy, Chris, Ben, and 4 security officers named Kyle, Derek, Nina, and Carmen, and they loaded into the shuttle with enough equipment to handle whatever they might face. The flight down to the surface was tense and silent, with everyone checking their weapons and gear repeatedly, a nervous habit that helped keep their minds focused on the mission. They landed near what remained of the main expedition camp, and the moment the shuttle doors opened, they all felt it, a pressure in the air, a wrongness that made their skin crawl and their instincts scream warnings. "Stay alert," Ryan commanded, his rifle up and ready as he led the team toward the entrance to the underground complex. "Keep your eyes open and watch each other's backs." The camp was destroyed, equipment scattered and broken, and when they found the first body, Amy knelt down to examine it despite the obvious cause of death. "Life force drained," she reported, her voice carefully controlled. "Every cell in the body shows signs of rapid aging and energy depletion." As if decades passed in seconds, they found Felcol barely alive in what remained of the communications building. The Vaxian researcher curled into a corner, his breathing shallow and his eyes wide with trauma. Ben immediately began treating him with medical supplies, while Ryan knelt down to get information. "Where's the child?" Ryan asked urgently. "Where's Sophie?" Thelkar's eyes focused slowly, and he grabbed Ryan's arm with surprising strength for someone so weak. "Lower chambers," he gasped. "She ran when it first manifested, hid in the collapsed section near the temple core, and I can still feel her life signature, faint but present." He coughed, a wet sound that made Amy wince. "The creature is searching," Felkor continued, moving through the complex systematically. "But something confuses it about the human child. Something in her mind that does not match what it expects from prey." Ryan did not waste time asking more questions. He organized the team, and they descended into the underground complex, following the map that Felkor had given them with shaking hands. The ruins were ancient beyond measure, with architecture that hurt to look at because the geometry was subtly wrong. Designed by minds that did not think in 3 dimensions the way humans did, moved through corridors lit only by their flashlights. And the deeper they went, the stronger that feeling of wrongness became. Until Nina suddenly stopped and raised her hand for silence. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, and everyone froze, straining their ears. At first there was nothing, but then they all heard it, a soft, quiet singing. A child's voice barely audible in the distance. "That is her," Amy said, recognizing a lullaby that human parents had sung to their children for generations. "She is trying to keep herself calm." They followed the sound, moving as quickly as they dared through the treacherous ruins. And that was when they first felt the creature's presence. It was like a shadow that moved in their peripheral vision. Never quite there when they looked directly, but always present, always watching. And with it came a wave of fear so intense that Kyle dropped to his knees, gasping. "Fight it," Ryan commanded, grabbing Kyle's shoulder. "It is just trying to scare us. Do not let it in your head." But the truth was that Ryan felt it too. That primal terror that made every instinct scream to run, to flee, to get away from this predator that had existed since before human civilization began. They pushed forward anyway, because that was what humans did, and after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, they found her. Sophie Chun was huddled in a small space created by collapsed stones, her arms wrapped around her knees, and she was singing that same lullaby over and over. Her voice small but steady. "Sophie," Ryan called softly, not wanting to scare her. "Sophie, my name is Ryan, and I am here to take you home." The little girl's eyes opened, and she looked at him with a mixture of fear and hope that made his heart ache. "My mom said someone would come," she whispered. "She said humans always come for their kids." Ryan reached out his hand, and Sophie took it, her small fingers gripping his with desperate strength. That was when the creature manifested fully for the first time, appearing at the end of the corridor like a nightmare given form. And even these hardened soldiers felt their courage waver, but Ryan pulled Sophie close, and his team formed up around them, weapons raised even though they had no idea if those weapons would help. "Run," he ordered. And they ran, carrying Sophie between them as the ancient horror pursued them through the dark. The entity that pursued them through the ancient corridors was something that should not exist in a rational universe. And every human who looked at it felt their minds struggle to process what their eyes were seeing. It moved like smoke and shadow, sometimes appearing solid and physical, other times seeming to exist only as a suggestion of form that twisted reality around it. And the temperature dropped 20 degrees wherever it manifested. Ryan's team ran with Sophie held tight between them, their boots pounding on ancient stone floors as the creature followed at a leisurely pace, almost playful in its pursuit. Like a predator that knows its prey cannot escape. "It is playing with us," Derek shouted, his voice tight with fear and anger. "It knows we cannot hurt it." Behind them, the corridor warped and twisted, walls bending in ways that made no geometric sense. And they could hear something like laughter echoing through the complex, though it sounded wrong, like multiple voices speaking in harmony, but out of sync with reality. Amy stumbled, and Kyle grabbed her arm to keep her from falling. And in that moment, the creature surged forward, moving impossibly fast. reaching for them with appendages that were sometimes claws and sometimes just extensions of darkness. Chris fired his weapon, the energy blast lighting up the corridor with bright blue light. And for just a second, they all saw the thing clearly, a mass of writhing shadows with too many eyes, all of them fixed on Sophie with an hunger that was older than stars. The blast passed through it without effect, and the creature's laughter grew louder. They burst through a doorway into a larger chamber, and Ryan made a split-second decision, ordering Mina and Carmen to set up a defensive position while the rest of them kept moving toward the surface. The two security officers did not hesitate, taking positions on either side of the doorway and opening fire with everything they had, buying precious seconds for their teammates to escape. Ryan heard their screams cut off suddenly behind them, and he knew without looking back that they were gone, drained of life in an instant. But he could not stop, could not even slow down, because Sophie was depending on them. They reached the shuttle 10 minutes later, gasping for breath and covered in sweat despite the cold. And Chris immediately began the launch sequence while the others strapped Sophie into a crash seat. "Get us to the Defiant," Ryan ordered, his voice harsh. "Maximum speed. Do not worry about regulations or safe flight paths." The shuttle lifted off just as the creature emerged from the ruins below, and through the viewport they could see it clearly for the first time in full light. And the sight made even Ryan's iron will falter. It was massive, easily 50 meters tall, with a form that constantly shifted and changed, never settling into one shape, and it radiated wrongness, a presence that made every instinct in their bodies scream danger. Sophie whimpered, and Amy wrapped her arms around the little girl, speaking softly to her. "You are safe now," Amy said, though they all knew it was a lie. "We are taking you home." The creature launched itself at the shuttle, moving with impossible speed, and Chris had to perform maneuvers that would have killed them if the inertial dampeners had been even slightly less effective. They made it to the Defiant with the entity close behind, and the moment they were aboard, Ryan ordered the ship to move to maximum distance while he took Sophie to the medical bay. Dr. Ben Carter was waiting there, having prepared a full medical workup. But what he found when he examined the little girl surprised everyone. "She is completely fine," Ben reported, his voice puzzled. "No physical injuries, no signs of psychic trauma. Her vital signs are actually better than expected, given what she's been through." Ryan looked at Sophie, who was sitting on the medical bed, swinging her legs and clutching a stuffed animal that Amy had given her. "How did you hide from it for so long?" Ryan asked gently. "How did you stay safe?" Sophie looked up at him with the serious expression that only children can manage. "I sang," she said simply. "My mom taught me songs, and when I sang them..." The monster seemed confused, like it could not find me properly. Ben's eyes widened with sudden understanding. "Her mind," he said excitedly. "Human children's minds develop differently than other species. We know this from comparative neurology studies. And our capacity for imagination and internal narrative might create a psychic signature that confuses the creature." Before he could explain further, alarms began blaring throughout the ship, and Ryan ran to the bridge to find his crew staring at the main view screen in horror. The devourer of innocence hung in space between them and the planet, somehow surviving in the vacuum without any visible means of support. And as they watched, it began broadcasting on all frequencies. The message was not words exactly, more like impressions and concepts forced directly into their minds. And every person on the ship heard it simultaneously. The creature was ancient. It told them, older than their species, older than most of the civilizations currently existing in the galaxy. And it had fed on countless worlds before the current galactic order even existed. It described its nature with something like pride. It was a predator that fed on potential energy, on the futures that young beings represented. And children of all species were its preferred prey, because their undeveloped minds offered the richest sustenance. 10,000 years ago, it had terrorized 17 different civilizations, draining world after world of their young until entire species faced extinction. And only through desperate sacrifice had the ancient alliance managed to imprison it. They had lured it into a trap by offering millions of their own children as bait, allowing it to feed until it was gorged and slow. And then they had used technologies now lost to seal it beneath Kethvar. And the species that had accomplished this had gone extinct from the effort. Having sacrificed an entire generation to save the galaxy, now it was free. And it was hungry, and it had tasted Sophie's unique psychic signature, which had drawn it from its slumber, and through her, it had sensed the presence of billions of other human children scattered across multiple worlds. The mayor had sensed the presence of billions of other human children, severity violence the fire the Cordians Volionchod. Creature's message ended with a simple declaration. It would feed on humanity's young first, taking its time to savor each one, and then it would move on to other species. Because no weapon in the current galactic arsenal could harm it, and no force could stop Itrine felt cold rage building in his chest as he processed what he had just heard. And when he looked around the bridge, he saw the same emotion reflected on every face. "Contact Ambassador Jake Morrison," Ryan ordered, his voice dangerously calm. "Tell him we need to enact the Haven Protocol." His communications officer looked at him in shock. "Sir, that protocol has never been used," she said. "The Council thinks it is just human bluster, a contingency plan that no species would actually implement." Ryan met her eyes, and she saw something there that made her immediately start sending the message. "They are about to learn something important about humanity," Ryan said quietly. "Something that every predator in this galaxy should know." He looked at the view screen where the creature still hung in space, confident and powerful and utterly sure of its superiority. "We do not run when our children are threatened," Ryan continued. "We do not hide, and we certainly do not surrender. Because there is nothing more dangerous in this universe than a human parent who has decided that something needs to die." Back on Harmony Prime, Jake received the message and immediately understood what needed to be done. And he called together the Galactic Council once more. But this time, he was not asking for permission or help. "Humanity is enacting the Haven Protocol," he announced, his voice carrying through the chamber with absolute certainty. "Every human ship in this sector is being recalled, and we are converging on Kethvar." The council erupted into chaos, with dozens of species shouting at once. But Jake just stood there calmly until Zixthel managed to restore order. "You cannot be serious," the ancient Valorian said, his voice full of disbelief. "You are gathering your people near this creature? You are bringing your families, your children, closer to the threat." Jake smiled, but there was no humor in it, only a cold determination that made several council members step back involuntarily. "That is exactly what we are doing," he confirmed. "Because predators chase things that run, and we want this thing to know that humanity does not run." He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every representative. "In 36 hours, there will be 30,000 humans at Kethvar," Jake said. "And many of them will bring their families, their children. Because we want to send a message that this creature will understand." Zixthel's multiple arms trembled as he realized what humans were planning. "You are insane," he whispered. "You are offering your young to this monster." "No," Jake corrected, his voice hard as steel. "We are daring it to try and take them." Ships began arriving at Keth for within hours of Jake's announcement. And they were not military vessels designed for combat, but instead mining ships, colony transports, scientific exploration craft, and family haulers, all retrofitted with whatever weapons their crews could install. The Galactic Council watched in, Absolute horror as humans did something that no other species had ever done. They brought their children toward danger instead of away from. Colony ship Washington arrived with 200 families aboard. Parents who had pulled their kids from school and packed up their lives in less than a day. And when asked why they would do something so reckless, a mother named Kelly Bryant gave an answer that summed up human thinking perfectly. Because if we hide our children, and this thing hunts them down anyway, they will die alone and afraid, she said calmly. But if we stand together, if we face this threat as a species, then at least they will know their parents fought for them. More ships arrived, the mining vessel Dakota with its crew of 50, the research ship Horizon carrying 3 families of scientists, the transport Freedom packed with volunteers who had no combat training but came anyway because they heard a child needed protecting. Captain Ryan Fletcher coordinated the defensive positions, organizing the makeshift fleet into a sphere around the planet with the Defiant at the center. And he placed Sophie in the most protected location possible. Surrounded by layers of ships and armed personnel, Amy stayed with the little girl constantly, playing games with her and reading stories, trying to keep her calm even as everyone prepared for battle. Why are all these people here? Sophie asked, her 6-year-old mind trying to understand why so many strangers would put themselves in danger for her. Amy knelt down to Sophie's eye level and took her small hands. Because that is what humans do. Amy explained gently. When something threatens a child, any child, we stop being smart or cautious or reasonable, and we become the scariest things in the galaxy. Sophie thought about this for a moment. Scarier than the monster? She asked. Amy smiled, but her eyes were deadly serious. Much scarier, she promised. Because monsters like that one only understand hunger and power. But humans understand something stronger. We understand love. And there is nothing more dangerous than someone fighting to protect what they love. The creature sensed the gathering of so many humans and emerged from the planet's surface, rising into space like a living nightmare. And when it felt the presence of thousands of human children aboard the various ships, it became excited in a way that made everyone's skin crawl through its psychic broadcast. They all felt its anticipation, its eagerness to feed on so much young life. And it projected images of what it would do, how it would drain each child slowly while their parents watched helplessly. But instead of the fear and despair it expected, the creature encountered something it had never felt before in 10,000 years. It felt anger. Pure and focused and absolutely unshakable. Every human in the fleet felt the creature's threats. And every single one of them responded the same way by checking their weapons and preparing to fight. Jake Morrison, still on Harmony Prime, broadcast a message that went to every human ship and to the Galactic Council simultaneously. Let me tell you something about my species, he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made even the council members pay attention. We are not the strongest race. We are not the smartest. We do not have the best technology or the longest history. He paused, looking directly at the camera. But we have something that no other species seems to understand, he continued. We have the absolute, unwavering certainty that our children are worth dying for. And more importantly, they are worth killing for. The creature attacked, launching itself at the nearest ship, a mining vessel called Colorado. And its crew of 30 men and women opened fire with converted mining lasers and improvised explosives. The weapons barely slowed the entity down. But the crew did not run, did not evacuate. They just kept firing until the creature tore through their ship's hull. And even as they died, they managed to damage one of its appendages, proving that it could be hurt. Even if only slightly, the beast roared, a sound that existed in both physical space and psychic dimensions. And it tried to project fear into the minds of every human present, showing them images of death and suffering, trying to break their will to fight instead. It encountered something completely unexpected. These humans had already decided they were willing to die, had made peace with that possibility the moment they volunteered for this mission. And beings who have accepted death cannot be frightened by threats of it. More ships engaged, coordinating their attacks in patterns that Ryan called out over fleet-wide communication. And while their weapons were not powerful enough to kill the creature, they were beginning to hurt it to slow it down. The entity, confused and growing frustrated, changed tactics and tried to reach Sophie directly, manifesting on the Defiant's hull and beginning to tear through the armor. Plating Ryan and his crew met it at every breach point, using themselves as living shields, and when the creature tried to drain their life force, it found that adult humans were toxic to it, their minds too developed and full of experiences that did not match the pure potential it craved, but the effort of resisting still killed them. And Ryan watched his crew fall one by one, each person buying seconds with their lives. Zany Rodriguez was the last one standing between the creature and Sophie when it finally broke through to the medical bay. And the combat medic raised her weapon, even though she knew it would not be enough. "You want to hurt that little girl?" Amy said, her voice steady despite the terror she felt. "Then you are going to have to go through me." The creature paused, genuinely confused by this behavior, because in its 10,000-year existence, it had never encountered prey that fought back like this, that chose death over survival. It reached for Amy, and she fired every weapon she had, screaming defiance even as the entity's touch began draining her life. That was when something fundamental shifted in the battle. Every human in the fleet felt Amy's death through some connection that had nothing to do with psychic powers and everything to do with shared humanity. And the rage that surged through them was like nothing the creature had ever encountered. Parents who had been holding back, trying to stay safe for their children's sake, stopped caring about survival and started caring only about vengeance. The mining ship Dakota rammed itself directly into the creature at full speed, its captain broadcasting a single message for Amy, for Sophie, for every child in this fleet. The explosion was massive, and the creature recoiled, actually hurt by the sheer force of the impact and the malice behind it. More ships followed, and the entity began to realize something terrifying. These humans were not trying to survive. They were trying to destroy it, and they were willing to sacrifice everything to do so. Harmony Prime Zixthil watched the battle unfold with growing horror. "They are winning," he whispered. "Somehow, these mad humans are actually hurting it." Another council member, a being made of crystalline energy, spoke with genuine awe. "They are not fighting to survive," it observed. "They are fighting to kill, and there is a difference. A difference that this creature has never encountered before." Back at Cathvar, Ryan made a decision that would change everything. He contacted Jake directly, his face appearing on screens throughout the fleet and in the council chamber. "I have an idea," Ryan said, blood running from a cut on his forehead. "But it requires someone to let this thing into their mind voluntarily, to make a psychic connection that goes both ways." Jake understood immediately what Ryan was suggesting. "If it connects to a human mind," Jake said slowly, "it will taste more than just innocence or potential. It will taste everything we are," Ryan confirmed. "Every dark thought, every violent impulse, every nightmare and horror that humanity has ever inflicted on itself." Jake stood up from his seat in the council chamber. "I am coming to you," he announced. "Prepare the connection. And tell Sophie that we are going to teach this ancient monster why it should have stayed buried." Zixthil grabbed Jake's arm as he moved to leave. "This could kill you," the old Valorian warned. "Or worse, it could drive you insane." Jake pulled his arm free gently. "Then I will die or go mad," he said simply. "But that little girl will live. And this creature will learn something that it should have known from the start." He looked at the view screen showing the battle. "You do not threaten human children and expect to survive the experience," Jake said quietly, "because we are not prey. We are not victims, and we are definitely not helpless. He headed for his personal ship. We are humans, and we are done being afraid. Jake Morrison arrived at the Defiant 8 hours later, having pushed his personal transport to speeds that would have made any engineer weep. And he found Captain Ryan Fletcher organizing what remained of the human fleet. They had lost 43 ships and over 2,000 people. But the creature was visibly weakened, its form flickering and unstable. Confused by the humans' refusal to behave like prey, Sophie was in the medical bay, sitting quietly with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, and when Jake entered, she looked up at him with eyes that were too old for a 6-year-old. "People died for me," she said simply, stating a fact that she was trying to understand. "Miss Amy died protecting me." Jake sat down beside her, his heart breaking at the weight this child was already carrying. "They died protecting the future," he corrected gently. "You represent something important, Sophie, not just to your mother or to me, but to every human everywhere." He took her hand carefully. "You represent the idea that we do not abandon our own." Jake explained that when one of us is in danger, especially a child, the rest of us will move heaven and earth to help. And that is worth dying for. Sophie thought about this, her young mind working through concepts that most adults struggled with. "Are you going to die too?" she asked, and Jake appreciated that she did not shy away from the hard questions. "Maybe," he admitted. "But if I do, it will be making sure that thing can never hurt you or any other child ever again." He stood up, and Ryan was waiting outside the medical bay with Dr. Ben Carter, who had prepared everything they would need for what came next. "The theory is sound," Ben explained, connecting monitoring equipment to Jake's head. "The creature feeds by creating a one-way psychic connection, drawing energy from its victim's mind. But if you can reverse that connection, make it two-way, then everything in your mind will flow into it as well." Ryan checked the energy readings on the sensors they had set up. "Human minds are not like other species," he added. "We carry trauma and darkness, violence and horror, things that a predator used to feeding on innocence has never tasted before." Jake nodded, understanding the risk he was taking, because opening his mind to this entity meant it would see everything. Every memory, every thought, every dark corner of his psyche. "Do it," he ordered. And Ben activated the psychic amplifier they had cobbled together from alien technology and human ingenuity. The creature sensed the opening immediately, felt the invitation to connect to this human's mind, and it surged forward eagerly. Anticipating an easy feast, the connection established in an instant, and the devourer of innocence plunged into Jake Morrison's thoughts, expecting to find the usual patterns of consciousness: fear, hope, dreams of the future, the soft vulnerabilities that made prey what they were. Instead, it encountered humanity's true nature. Raw and unfiltered. Jake did not resist, did not try to hold anything back. He let the creature see everything, starting with his own personal history, the death of his father in a mining accident, the years of poverty that followed, the violence he had witnessed growing up in the rough colonies on Mars, the people he had killed during the border wars. But that was just one human's experience. And Jake opened wider, letting the entity taste humanity's collective memory, our shared history of survival and suffering. The creature saw World War I, trenches filled with dying soldiers, poison gas drifting across battlefields, and the absolute waste of human life for territory that ultimately meant nothing. It tasted World War II, the Holocaust's industrial murder of millions, the atomic bombs that ended cities in seconds, and the cold calculation behind every death. It experienced the genocides, the massacres, the countless smaller atrocities that humans had inflicted on each other throughout history. And with each horror, the creature began to understand something fundamental about this species. Humans knew suffering intimately because they had inflicted it on themselves for thousands of years. And that made them immune to intimidation by external threats. Jake pushed deeper, showing the creature not just humanity's capacity for violence, but the reasons behind it. And this was what truly poisoned the entity: when humans killed, when humans fought, when humans destroyed. It was rarely for hunger or instinct. It was for love, for protection, for the desperate need to keep their family safe. The creature saw mothers who would kill to protect their children, fathers who would die to save their sons and daughters, and entire communities that would burn the world down before allowing harm to come to their young. It tasted the rage of a species that had crawled up from caves and dirt to conquer their planet, not through superior strength or natural weapons, but through sheer stubborn refusal to give up. And underneath all of it, beneath the violence and horror and trauma, the entity encountered something that made it recoil in genuine fear. For the first time in its existence, it felt human love. The fierce protective instinct that made parents into warriors, that transformed ordinary people into heroes, that drove humans to accomplish the impossible when their children were threatened. The devourer tried to break the connection, suddenly desperate to escape from this toxic flood of experiences. But Jake held on with iron will, forcing more and more memories into the creature's consciousness. Captain Ryan watched the monitors, seeing Jake's vital signs fluctuate wildly as he maintained the psychic link. His brain activity is off the charts, Ben reported, his voice worried. He cannot sustain this much longer. But Jake was not done yet. He showed the creature every war humanity had ever fought, every time humans had faced extinction and survived, every moment where giving up would have been easier, but humans chose to keep going anyway. He showed it the determination of explorers who crossed oceans not knowing what was on the other side, of scientists who spent lifetimes pursuing knowledge, of artists who created beauty in the face of horror. He showed it humans at their absolute worst and at their incredible best. And the combination was poisonous to a being that only understood hunger and power. The devourer of innocence began to destabilize, its form flickering between dimensions as it tried desperately to process what it was experiencing in the council chamber on Harmony Prime. Zixthal and the other representatives watched in awe as sensors detected the creature's energy signature breaking down. What is he doing to it? Someone asked, their voice full of wonder and horror. He is teaching it fear, Zixthal answered. Finally understanding, he is showing it that humanity is not prey. We are predators who have temporarily chosen to be civilized, but when our children are threatened, we remember what we really are. The creature's final psychic broadcast went out to every ship in the fleet and to council sensors across multiple star systems. It was a warning, sent in the last moments before its consciousness shattered completely. They are not prey, the message said. Raw and desperate. They are honey badgers dressed as lambs. And they do not care what you are or how powerful you think you are. The entity's form began collapsing in on itself, unable to exist in multiple dimensions while its consciousness was fragmenting. They will kill you, the warning continued. They will kill you without hesitation if you threaten what they love. And they love their children more than they fear death. Ryan saw their chance and ordered every remaining ship to fire simultaneously, channeling their weapons through the psychic link that Jake was maintaining, supercharging it with raw energy. The combined assault, physical and psychic together, was too much for the weakened creature to withstand. The devourer of innocence, ancient predator that had destroyed 17 worlds and survived 10,000 years of imprisonment, imploded with a scream that echoed across dimensions. The psychic shockwave knocked out every sensor in the system. And for 5 long minutes, no one knew if Jake had survived. When communications were restored, they found him unconscious in the medical bay, Sophie sitting beside him holding his hand. He is alive, Ben reported with relief. Exhausted and possibly suffering from psychic shock, but alive. Jake woke 3 days later to find Sophie still there. This time, with her mother, Dr. Elisa Chun, who had arrived from a nearby research station. "Did we win?" Jake asked, his voice harsh. Ryan, standing at the foot of the bed, smiled grimly. "The creature is destroyed," he confirmed. Its death broadcast reached sensors across multiple sectors, and every ancient predator that might have been listening got the message loud and clear. Jake managed a weak laugh. "What message is that?" he asked, though he already knew Sophie answered before anyone else could. Her small voice serious and certain. "That humans do not run from monsters," she said. "We make the monsters run from us." News of the battle spread throughout the galaxy within days, and the Galactic Council's perception of humanity changed fundamentally as it gave a speech that became famous across multiple worlds. "We thought humans were young and reckless," he said. "We thought their devotion to their children was a weakness to be pitied. But we were wrong." He looked at the assembled representatives, many of whom were quietly reconsidering their relationships with humanity. "Their love for their young is not weakness," Zixthel continued. "It is the source of their greatest strength, and any species that threatens human children will learn what the Devourer learned too late." He paused for effect, that there is nothing in this galaxy more dangerous than a human parent who has decided something needs to die.